Today at the shop, I'm working on this project, Frontier, that I picked up. It's got some engine issues that I'm unwilling to diagnose and fix while it's inside. So I'm gonna go ahead and yank the engine out. I've got a spare engine that I wanna throw in it, and hopefully while doing so, that really fixes any other issues that it's got. Probably not, but that's what I'm hoping for. I don't have time today to do a pull or even to really begin doing a pull. I have somewhere to be in a couple hours, so I really only have time to prepare. So my goal for now is to just kind of get battery pulled, airbox, radiator, get it on jack stands, wheels, inner fender wells, stuff like that. So I'm gonna get to cracking on that, and hopefully I get more done than is in my head, because this is gonna take a while. It's got power steering fluid, yay! In case you haven't heard what this engine sounds like, there's a video that I've recently posted called Guess That Noise, and you'll hear it. Let me know what you think, because it doesn't sound good.
Okay, now begins the beer drinking portion of this video. I originally wanted to do talking while I was working, but it became a very long video, and I think that a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is kind of preliminary, so you might care to know about it, you might not. For the more detailed guys, the more technical guys, none of this stuff is really going to be important to you, but some stuff might be. Right now I'm just pulling the hood off. There are 4 12mm nuts. It's a lot easier just to gain access to see everything once you actually get that hood off. The lighting in my shop's not the best, so it helps quite a bit. And I've got my little Ziploc baggie because I'm a little crazy with that stuff, so I threw the nuts in the baggie and threw it on the hood. The next up is the battery. And those, as long as no one messes with them from the factory, they should be 10mm. But I've seen 13s and 12s and stuff before, so you just gotta watch out for it. And really the goal is to make pulling the engine easier. So it really depends on how much work you want to do and how much effort you want to put into it. That covers 2 10mm bolts, and then there's 2 little rubber clips back there that you just kind of got to gently yank up. The xterras actually don't, as much as I can tell, they don't come with them. The next thing I'm working on is the air box, and that is the mass airflow sensor plug and clip. And then there's 2 clips at the end of the airbox, and at the throttle body there's a little like Titan clamp. So once you loosen all that stuff up, you'll have 2 10mm bolts, a breather hose that goes to the valve cover, and then a breather hose from your front diff that you also need to clip. The front diff breather hose is kind of the last one you need to get. Now once everything's exposed, you'll actually be able to kind of flip it upside down and grab it. There's that Ziploc bag again. And now that plainly and clearly kind of exposes some other stuff that I would like to get to, because I'm going to pull the engine out without pulling the front clip off. And I think here's where I first discovered that air filter, and I am probably pretty convinced that had they done maintenance on the truck before the engine blew, it wouldn't be as big of an issue. But you know, that's hearsay and guesswork, but I really think had they just probably maintenanced it quite a bit better, it would have been completely fine. And right now I'm going to get the truck up in the air, do my little duck dance. Oh yeah, get that workout in. And luckily I've got some pretty heavy jack stands. I've thought about adding a lift to my shop, but the ceiling's a little low, so it just never made any sense. At least for right now. I've looked into the max jacks, but I haven't got that far yet. I don't want to spend the money on it. Yeah, so now that that's up in the air, I'm going to go ahead and pull the... I think I discovered that there's a security key. Yeah, there's like a... This dummy, I guess, I don't know why he would have done that on a stock 16-inch wheel. but he had a security lug nut on there. And the rest of the factory one should be a 21 millimeter. And I think the torque value on that to put them back on is a 98 foot-pounds. I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure. And obviously in the star pattern method. And again, everybody does kind of pulls like this stuff differently. So if you're a junkyard guy and you only care about the engine core, you're probably out there with a torch cutting everything apart. If you're a guy trying to rebuild this better than factory, you're probably taking it apart cleaner and nicer than I am. You might not have to take everything apart that I end up taking apart to actually get the engine out. These are just the things that I've come across that I know that I need to get out, so that way I have a successful pull without any big damage or problems. And right now I'm getting that lower skid plate. It's got, I think, 5 or 6 10 millimeter bolts up front. 2 of them go into the frame, and the rest of them are into that plastic. Once you get those off, there's just 2 that are on the that front little cross member there that is right in front of the diff, and those actually slide on, so you just have to loosen those, and then you can kind of slide that skid plate out of the way. And once that skid plate's out of the way, you'll be able to access things a lot easier, like the oil pan, radiator, shroud, stuff like that. That masonry tub that I've got is you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's for, I don't know, under $10, and it holds way more fluid than you would get, like, say you go to O'Reilly's or something like that. You're going to spend like $20, $30 for one of their pans, or $5 or $10 for one of their pans, and it's like a quarter of that size. So just food for thought if you're looking for a nice big basin to hold fluids. And I think while that's draining, probably the next step I would want to get going on is getting that fan shroud out so I can get to the clutch fan. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone pull the engine without taking the core support out while having the clutch fan on. So since I'm not taking the core support out, I want to take off as much as I can on that front end, which really is just that fan. With that clutch fan out of the way, I'm pretty sure the rest of the stuff can stay on the front of that engine and it'll come out without too much muss or fuss. So the bolts I'm taking off now are the fan shroud and the electric fan. Those are just 10 millimeter bolts. They're coarse threaded and they go into plastic, so whenever you put them back on, definitely be careful. And now with that loose, you really should start taking off like the upper radiator hose, the shared tank hose with the, it's not a coolant overflow. So like the radiator cap on these Nissans is not a spring cap. It's just like a pass-through, so that hose that I'm taking off right now shares fluid with the secondary tank kind of at all times. It doesn't just shoot over there whenever there's too much pressure or heat. So once you get those hoses moved out of the way, you can kind of more freely move that fan shroud. And it looks like I'm working on the plug for the electric fan. There's a couple of small wire clips that you need to get to there, and then the actual plug itself, which isn't hard. If you're working on something that's dirty or like grimy, an air gun can definitely help kind of blow air around it, because you can get little pieces of sand in between these connectors, and they'll take you a good 5-8 minutes to get apart. If you're not, if you're just yanking on it, you could definitely hurt something. So you could try blowing air in it, will help. You could try spraying some kind of grease in it that wouldn't hurt anything. My go-to is to turn the plug itself upside down and knock it around a little bit, because once you actually knock it around, it'll knock a bunch of stuff out and free. Now I'm working on getting the lower shroud piece out, and it's just a small piece with a couple of clips on it. And what that lets you do is pull the shroud and the electric fan out at once without pulling the clutch fan off. See the electric fan coming out. See the shroud coming out. Oh, I'm drinking Victoria beer, by the way. It's delicious. It's bottled in Chicago, Illinois. Nope. Nava, Mexico. It's imported into Chicago. The license plate had spikes on it. I think it starts bugging me either here or it already did. The thing I've learned with the clutch fan it's easier and better to give quick torque as opposed to pulling it slowly because of the way that the pressure and tension sits on that belt. If you kind of like put your 10 on it, it's a 10 millimeter nut, or 4 of them. If you put your 10 on it and get a little bit of tension and then kind of back up a little bit with your hand but leave the tension on it and then come back and smack it over to the left, that'll break those free without rubbing your belt. But in case you need to put more tension on your belt, you can throw a 3/8. Oh, there's that license plate that was bugging my shins. You can throw a 3/8 on the belt tensioner and then push down on it to actually put more tension on it, and that'll hold the clutch fan kind of more in place so you can take those nuts off. Oh, you and me both, brother. Yeah, and see, it already stressed me out. I can guarantee. Well, it looks like I have back problems. I'm probably going to, but I can. You got to be careful if you aren't like if you're like an aloof or like you're kind of living up in the clouds when you're working on stuff. I wouldn't just set your ratchets and wrenches and stuff just down in the engine bay unless you're really careful. I've lost many a tools and parts by setting stuff down. So at a certain point, I'll kind of give up on taking stuff apart and I'll start blowing stuff out and cleaning it because I've lost tools and parts under leaves before, and I can see leaves on this truck. But once you get all 4 of those nuts off, that fan shroud just kind of hangs onto the 4 studs. You just kind of got to gently, pull it from side to side until it wiggles free. And then once it actually comes off, it's probably a good idea to go throw 4 of those nuts back on just to keep that pulley on there and kind of taut so it doesn't fall off. And you just have to finger tighten it really just to get it back on and out of the way. Yeah, and it kind of pays to have, you can see my skinny little arms in there. It pays to have smaller arms and hands and to be able to kind of stand with your back like that and bent over. Because this really is just getting the main stuff kind of out of the way, so pulling the engine is a little bit easier. Yeah, putting the nuts back on. I think I dropped one of them too. But once you get stuff like what I'm doing out of the way, the next kind of things that you can concentrate on are the exhaust, getting that unhooked in some way. Now, each one I wouldn't say is different, but based on your rust and where you're located, you might have good luck or really bad luck. It kind of depends. I just wipe the petcock off for the radiator and put it back in. So right now I'm pulling that front little fascia back a little bit so I can expose the radiator bolts. The front fascia top are just some plastic clips, and then the bottom there's more plastic clips that run throughout the length of it, and then on each side where the headlights are at, there's pronged clips. And those pronged clips are what I'm kind of struggling with a little bit. So what I end up doing to obviously save a little bit of time is to just pull it back far enough to where I can actually get to the 10 millimeter bolt that holds the radiator mount down. And I've got that, and I can see I can push the radiator now, so that's good, and that's out of the way. And now that's a 10 millimeter bolt that connects the AC condenser to the radiator, and there's another one on the other side. And with both of those out, that is not all that the AC condenser holds on to. You have to push the radiator back towards the engine a little bit, and once it's back towards the engine, then you can lift up on the condenser and then pull it back towards you, and it'll pull it out of its feet of the radiator. And there, now that I've got the lower hose exposed, I'm getting the lower hose out, and I always pull it out on the engine side just because the hose is pretty tall, so that way any fluid that's still in the radiator isn't just going to start leaking out all over the ground. Yeah, so there I'm pulling the radiator back, lifting the AC condenser up out of its feet, and you'll see whenever it kind of comes out because it goes down. Yeah, there it goes. It goes pretty far down there now. And then with all of that disconnected, you really only have one more item down below. It's the lower radiator hose mount that sits on the side of the end, or the side of the frame, and it's just a plastic mount, and sometimes it can be a little tricky. I think I ended up messing with it for a good couple minutes before I actually got it off. But like I was saying earlier, this really is just kind of the preliminary stuff. Once all this stuff's out of the way, depending on how your exhaust is how you take it off. You might want to take it off with the cats. I know that one side of the cats you can leave on, one side you kind of should take off. If the bolts come off really easy, you should take them off. If they're really rusty, you might have to cut. See, and then the radiator just slides right out. You got to be a little careful not to rub and hit something that you shouldn't, but you should definitely be able to take it out without too much muss or fuss, and you definitely shouldn't have to break anything to get it free. It should definitely kind of slide right out. And I think right now I'm kind of going over my next plan of attack as far as what I need to do to actually get it pulled. And you'd be surprised how little you actually have to take off of an engine to actually get it pulled. I think as far as how it's setting, yeah, I think I've had enough. I want to clean and I think I have to leave, but I end up pulling the inner fender wells after this. But with how the engine's setting right now, it really is just getting the wiring harness out, the accessories off. Like if you don't want to crack your power steering open, you could take the power steering pump off of the engine and tuck it into the fender well after you pull out the inner fender well. And the AC, likewise, that's on the driver's side. You pull that off, you tuck it into the fender well. And then, like, you could pull the alternator off to make it a little bit easier for you so you're not really messing with it. It's just a couple of bolts. Once you get the power steering out of the way, the alternator on the passenger side's fairly easy to get to. It's it takes a couple minutes and maybe would have been in your way. So it kind of stuff like that. I don't know if you want to take the time to do that. If you do, there's no harm in it, but maybe you're on a time crunch and you just don't have time to take that off. So it makes sense as to why you wouldn't. Stuff like that I'll probably end up doing just because I am not sure exactly where this truck's going to end up when I'm done, but I definitely want to make sure that it's all done, at least in a proper enough way that it's going to run for a good couple of years without any issues. Yeah, and see here I'm blowing all this stuff out just to make sure I haven't dropped or lost anything because man, I don't know how well all of your guys' minds work, but mine's a little scatterbrained every once in a while, but I kind of keep it all together as best as possible. Yeah, and it really does feel good just kind of getting a better lay of the land and really seeing every little bolt and hose and seeing the condition of it and trying to see if they've ever taken it apart before, or see like rub marks on something. So then like, oh, maybe they've had an issue with like the brake booster, or maybe they've had the intake off a couple of times. So inspecting stuff like that is always, I wouldn't say it's a fun treat or a joy to do, but it is something that I like doing just because it's really fun to like investigate and to see if you can tell, like if you really can tell a difference. And a lot of the times you can, especially if you start really working on these cars a lot. I think I just grabbed that nut for the clutch fan. But yeah, like I was saying, the exhaust, the engine harness, bell housing, bolts. I'll go over those more in depth whenever I actually go to pull it, and whenever I take the bolts out. But beyond that, torque converter, engine mount. I think that'd really be about it. Yeah, it's really not too far away. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. The engine harness is a little tricky. It's not a big deal, but the engine harness is connected to the transmission and transfer case, so you have to pull all that harness apart and then run it back up through the engine bay. So that's definitely something to be aware of. You have an ECU plug and some plugs in your IPDM and stuff like that you kind of have to maneuver out of the way. So there's definitely some tricky maneuvering that you need to do, but it's time consuming, but none of it is overly difficult or hard. I've done most of these all by myself. Like right now, I just pulled out the driver's side inner fender well. That's just a couple of Phillips head screws and then some plastic clips. And now that I've got that out, I'm going to blow the whole area out just to kind of keep it a little tidy in there, get rid of the gunk and the dirt that I can and can't see, and kind of inspect everything and see if I see anything that stands out or something that looks weird I need to replace. I thought I was going to be on my second beer by now. I'm almost done with my first. And I don't always compulsively clean, but I know I'm going to be spending a lot of time on the ground, especially whenever it comes to the exhaust. Getting the harness out of the transmission and then getting a lot of the bell housing bolts off, getting the torque converter off. That stuff's all going to kind of be, all that shit on the ground is going to be in my way. And then this has just kind of jumped over to the passenger side inner fender well. I'm a huge fan of power tools now that I have them as an adult, but I tell you what, there's definitely something to be said for using hand tools whenever you're learning. I feel like I got a deep understanding of torque values with my arms and hands growing up working without tons of power tools. So it's just a little food for thought. Cleaning that out, inspecting it, and that's really about it. That's all I get accomplished for this time, and that's good. It's a really good starting point. It's a great jumping off point. So more next time. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks.